Hi, everybody, and welcome to week 4 of Communication and Popular Culture. Hopefully, you are feeling close to the end because you definitely are. This week is a big week, and so this weekly recap will kind of set up what you have to do in the next 4 or 5 days, and we'll also review the content from quizzes 5 and 6 that you just got done taking. So let's get started. This week, the unit opens today, as you've probably seen, Unit 6. So you need to do Unit 6, which includes taking Quiz 7 and doing all the normal kind of reading and discussion board posts and Prezi. It's a fairly short unit because you also have your problem solver project due, and that is due Wednesday at 5. And when I pop over to Blackboard, I'll show you where you turn that in. So Unit 7, our last unit, starts on Thursday, and it actually runs through next week. I've given you some additional time to do it, both so I can grade your problem solver projects and also so that you can get a head start working on your study guide, starting to get prepared for the test, and also get working on that infographic. So once you turn in your problem solver project Wednesday at 5 and kind of finish that content, take Quiz 7, do all that kind of stuff, just take a chance to breathe and start looking ahead so you can get prepared for what you need to do to prepare for the final exam and kind of just that last week of this whirlwind semester. All right. I want to go into our site to show you a couple different things. One, I'm going to release this tab right here, this turn in tab pretty soon. And that turn in tab is where you turn in your problem solver project. And you'll also turn in your infographic there as well. Just a reminder, your problem solving project, you need to have a summary in which you kind of describe the problem and describe how your solution fixes that problem, but you also need some sort of prototype or actual thing that you design. And if you haven't done so already, you need to take a look at that assignment guide and the rubric, which you can find under assignment descriptions. If for some reason you have a URL that you need me to access, make sure that that is very clearly labeled when you turn in your project, and it should be in your summary as well. Okay, so I have turned in sample quiz answers for the last 2 quizzes that you've taken. You find them at the bottom here. Quiz 5 and Quiz 6. But I also wanted to walk through the quizzes with you because we did have some problems, and I had several people kind of request some additional material and additional information just because I know that some of that gender stuff and especially that article about Ellen is kind of difficult. So let's go into the unit. You won't be able to see these quizzes, but I can. And so I just want to walk through the quizzes and talk through them in case that helps. All right, let's go into Quiz 5 here. Okay, so if you see in the sample quiz answers that I posted, this should become a little bit more self-explanatory, and most of you did pretty well here. So remember when we learned about the feminist perspective, we learned about the gender system in general, and that's why taking a feminist perspective is good for men and women, because feminists are very concerned with the way masculinity and kind of negative portrayals of men impact men and women. And what feminist scholars have long claimed is that these two portrayals work together. And the way you see that in your reading is when men are portrayed as hyper masculine, right? So that means they have, very kind of traditional masculine bodies. They're seen as adventurers. They're seen as having callous attitudes towards sex and love. That's all from your reading about hyper masculinity. That works really, really well with what the Codes of Gender video claimed, that women are often seen as kind of infantilized, as childlike, as weak, and as vulnerable, right? So that hyper masculine portrayal of men work and complement nicely kind of this notion that a lot of advertisers portray of women being weak and vulnerable. So that's how they work together. No, I didn't mean to submit it. Sorry, guys. Okay, so question 2. In the video Codes of Gender, Jolly argues that the media promotes a sense of normalcy in terms of gender roles. He proves this by arguing it's all of the above, that there is a pattern of masculine and feminine displays and those patterns become normalized, that he argues that advertising is not just a medium, but that it doesn't just sell products, it also sells kind of a lifestyle and it sells a value system. Also, he says that people argue their gender category not because there's something essential in us that we're born with, but because we see particular messaging again and again and again in culture, and that is reinforced to us, and so then we start to mimic it. All right, question 3, hypermasculinity. Hypermasculinity is not just being masculine or being a man. Hypermasculinity is an exaggerated performance of biological maleness, and that focuses on danger and risk and muscular bodies. And so it's not just that you see a man in an advertisement. Every man is not hypermasculine, but if it's kind of this really exaggerated kind of where the body is like super buff and the guy is taking super risks and and the man is very, very callous toward women, that's hypermasculinity. All right, one example of a feminine pose that was discussed in the Codes of Gender. Most of you really, really nailed this, and it was typically twofold. So one, people would argue that it was that kind of those vulnerable poses where the women were laying down, where they were off balance, where they were touching themselves in some way to show kind of danger and that they were at risk. There was also the infantilized poses where women were dressed and posed as children. And both of those mean that women are, in need of care and that they are the weaker sex and things like that. And most of you did really, really well with that. All right, and then I asked you to analyze this Kraft advertisement. And remember, in this class, our university core requirements is that you're moving from knowledge to judgment. So the one question asks you for your knowledge of how these poses work, and this asks you to use that knowledge to judge this. And if you've taken a look at the sample answers, you know that I'm wanting there for you to talk about how this is typically a pose associated with women, where he's lying down, he's maybe at risk, he's kind of touching himself, and he's also incredibly sexualized. And so what I wanted you to do was talk through the impact that had when it was a male body. And some of you did that really, really well. All right, so that's quiz 5. Let's go into quiz 6 and talk a little bit more about that. All right, quiz 6 asked you to watch a couple of clips. One was an Axe video, an Axe commercial, and the other one was a Real O'Neal's clip. Okay, in the Real O'Neal's clip, a different type of father or man in this unit, and how so? This is from the article Congratulations Television, in which they talk about the dichotomy between men, and they say that typically men are portrayed as one of two things. One, they are seen as like super emotional and kind of quote unquote feminine and dorky and weird, and then they're not seen as a man, or they are portrayed as really kind of manly men, and then they're completely devoid of emotion or intellect or common sense, kind of that doofy husband dichotomy that we talked about when we learned about the feminist perspective. And so, yeah, I mean, people said different things. I mean, a lot of people said that he was somewhere in between, that he kind of seemed masculine because he was like a cop, but he also was wearing skinny jeans, so he kind of was like demasculated as well. But it was really that dichotomy that I was hoping that you would get to. Girl power programming girl power programming can be described as having progressive and empowering characters because they're contradictory and complicated. That is absolutely true. Sometimes showing girls who reject males and the structure of male-female relationships. That is also true, but it is also true that these female shows are easily co-opted, so that sometimes things that are girl power are actually anti-feminist or anti-woman messages. And in order to know that the answer here is all of the above, you had to read about girl power, and then you also had to read that kind of Is Girl Power Good for Women article as well. So this answer is all of the above. Does the Real O'Neal's clip seem to reject or confirm Dow's argument about the political or individual strategy that Ellen used in her show? Most people said it confirms because it used humor. It also was really focused on the family rather than political change. But really, you could have argued anything here as long as you rooted it in the arguments that Dow made about Ellen. And what Dow said about Ellen is that the show used humor to kind of diffuse and minimize the political nature of Ellen's coming out. That the show was more concerned with kind of her acceptance at a familial or friend level rather than at a political level. So it's like she really only cared about her parents accepting her, not about kind of political change. And third, something that I hadn't thought of, but you could have said, and some people did say, is that the confession that kid makes, that Kenny makes, is really similar to the confession that Ellen makes, right? And so you could have unpacked some of what Dow says about confession, which is that we really only confess to like bad things and the impact of that. What's one specific from your reading masculinity stereotype that the commercial rejects? There were three primary stereotypes talked about in the article. One, that all men have really kind of buff, athletic, muscular bodies. Two, that men like to take risks and that they put themselves at danger. And that three, that men have a callous relationship towards sex and women. And most of you did a really great job unpacking those. If you didn't get full credit here, it's because your answers weren't rooted in the reading and you were just kind of talking about weird and vague aspects of maleness. Heteronormativity is not the same thing as homophobia. If you are homophobic, it means you hate gay people. If you are heteronormative, it means you assume everybody is straight, but that if you find out that someone isn't straight, you might be okay with it. We express heteronormativity in a lot of different ways. We saw it in that Ellen clip when Oprah said, "Have you ever had a connection with anyone?" And she said yes, and she said, "Well, what was his name?" She assumed that the connection that she had was with a man. That's a heteronormative assumption. People do it to me all the time with my kids. I have two girls, and my one daughter who just finished kindergarten, one of her best friends is a boy, and people will say things all the time like, "Oh, are you going to grow up to marry Sam?" Or "Is he your best friend?" Or "Is he your boyfriend?" That kind of stuff, and it puts them in a really kind of heteronormative lifestyle. And so that's what I'm looking for there. Now, if you're homophobic, it means that you hate gay people, or at least you discriminate against them, or you are uncomfortable with them. Heteronormative just means that you assume that people are straight. And typically when we are watching media, we as audience members, we assume that characters are straight because that's what a majority of our characters are. All right, I hope this kind of walk through these questions helps clear up some of the material. But as always, let me know if you have any additional questions or if I can clarify them anymore. I will talk to you very soon and have a great week.